Hello and welcome to this episode of Mind the Gap, making education work across the globe with me, Tom Sherrington, and the amazing Emma Turner. Hello, Emma.
Hello, Tom. How are you?
Yeah, pretty good. I'm excited about this episode and the news we just had that our podcast is now getting sort of 1,600 plays per episode. And that is mind-blowing as far as we're concerned. So thank you to everyone listening. And we're also going to have the second episode of our head-to-head, as we're now calling it, where we ask each other hard questions. The last one was really good fun. So that's what we're going to do. So I started last time. So this time it's your turn to start by firing your question at me.
Okay. So as you know, I've got a big interest in curriculum, but one of the problems is that curriculum is often overstuffed, too much in it. So my question would be, if you had to remove a subject from the national curriculum, what would you remove?
It's such an unfair question. I'll tell you why it's a difficult question. It's because there are teachers of those subjects who are invested in teaching them. Mm-hmm. And especially in a secondary school, this is a real decision. And if you start taking the subject away, you're sort of saying, I don't think your work matters. This is like, it's not a neutral question, this, where what are my preferences? Okay.
I think it's fairly straightforward in primary. I think it's slightly easier framing in primary, more difficult in secondary. So, okay, let's take your subject that you taught.
Okay.
If you could get rid of an aspect of the subject that you taught, what would you remove from the curriculum?
Well, I mean, that could get quite sort of specific about science. I used to be a science teacher, and there were definitely things where you think, well, there's whole topics. You think, well, you know, how much do they need to know about that particular type of chemistry or that development of electricity? So you could sort of pare down a little bit. But I want to sort of face a challenge a bit more full on about a subject, and I'm going to be really brave and say, I think where if it was just down to me, I would create more of a kind of creative arts kind of situation where there was much more focus on creativity sort of in and around the curriculum. And so not everything was taught in a kind of teacher-led academic sort of way leading to exams, but you would have much more arts engagement. So you could find space by creating opportunities for students to do creative projects and things without every single thing being taught. And I think design and technology is a classic example where there are so many slices it gets chopped up into to give everyone a flavour that you end up not doing any of them particularly well because there's not enough time. So a bold decision would say in a school that we're just going to do making with wood and metal, and we're not going to do textiles and food and graphics because there's just not enough time. So we're just going to focus on that. And that's one of the ways that I would save time. But it's a bit of a fudge. And I really am, as I'm answering that question, I'm thinking about the teachers, because it's a horrible thing to hear someone say that they don't think your subject matters, you know. So, and I'm kind of crippled by that sensitivity to really answer the question properly.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one because it kind of goes back to why you would teach it as well. I think it's more, not necessarily whether it's of more worth, but really understanding as a school why you've got that in your curriculum, why it's earned its place there, why you give it that emphasis. And I think potentially schools need to think really carefully, especially at primary, about why that subject earns its place on the curriculum, and is there enough kind of fidelity to what it's actually trying to achieve, rather than just getting swamped by the idea of stuff to cover. So does your curriculum actually reflect the essence of each subject, rather than just trying to say, oh, there's too much in there, let's just get rid of that bit, let's get rid of that bit. I don't know whether that narrows it.
I know a school which I get a wet name because it's its own decision, but I know where they did a big review of their curriculum in a very thorough way, where everyone had to sort of really build up from first principles. And they made a choice not to teach ICT at Key Stage 3, information and communication technology, because they felt that it didn't really have enough substance to it. And they just decided to introduce computer science as a GCSE in year 10 and 11. So that proper subject with an academic background and practical application, largely based around maths knowledge and so on, but not do ICT about applications and stuff in year 7, 8 and 9. They just axed it. And I thought, when they made the case to me, I could understand why.
Yeah, and I think that's the important distinction, isn't it? Rather than just saying, well, we haven't got enough time, let's just cut something out, is actually reverse engineering it and actually thinking, why do we teach this? What do we want to achieve? What's the purpose of the inclusion of it? What do we actually want children to experience and come out with at the end of it? And that really informs your curriculum and makes your decisions a lot more robust, I think, rather than just thinking, there's not time, something's got to give. It's actually thinking, so what are we actually trying to do with this? And I think that's potentially the wider conversation that would be helpful around that, essentially.
Yeah, but boy, what a hard question.
So, I like to start with a difficult one. Straight off the bat.
Yeah, I maybe if I had a bit more time to think about it. I mean, there are always winners and losers in a kind of, if you think of it in that way, when you say, if I have more time for this, it's less time for that. Mm-hmm. It's a really, really tough one. But sort of taking something out altogether is a whole other story. And it might be better to sort of integrate things rather than just dispose them. But sometimes, I mean, I'm swayed by the argument that someone like Martin Robinson, who wrote the Trivium, would make that the less is more thing isn't necessarily, in a fewer things in greater depth, isn't necessarily the right approach. That maybe having a good overview survey of lots of things is actually good generally. So history, geography, and so on. And having had Laura McInerney on, if any one of us said that we should drop citizenship, we would never be able to live in
is that who you had in your head when you were answering that?
Exactly. Well,
Laura's never going to speak to me again.
Well, some schools drop citizenship straight away. They just don't even do it. They morph it into PSHE and it all gets lost. So, yeah, wow, it's a tough question. Okay, I'm going to hit you with yours. Okay, so let's assume we've made the case that we should spend more money on education as a country, and so therefore head teachers should have more money. Why? What should they spend it on? What does money buy you in education? What should you spend the more money on to make children learn more?
Sadly, and from visiting lots of schools and from, not say touring the country, that makes it sound like a band, but you get in this kind of role to go into lots of buildings. I think the fabric of the buildings is so poor in a lot of our institutions, a lot of our organisations. They're literally, children are being taught in places that are falling down around their ears. And you kind of have to ask, what's the messaging that we're sending about the importance of education if you're educating children in buildings that are substandard, that are cold, that are damp, that are the electrics don't work properly, that they're not served well by internet connections and all sorts of things. You kind of have to get the infrastructure right first. So I think before you made any decisions about staffing or curriculum or resourcing or anything like that, if there was a magic money pit, it would be to create environments for children that are warm, dry, safe, and watertight. For a start, I mean, my old classroom used to have a window that opened and the water ran down the wall into the electric socket. And you just think, you laugh, that's what it actually happened. And 4 of the windows were permanently jammed open, and this is pre-COVID. They just did not shut. But because it was a listed building, there wasn't the money to put the special windows in that we had. So we were always freezing and shivering. I remember teaching with snow coming through the windows down on me whilst I was teaching. So you kind of have to think, if there was a lot of money, I'd want to invest it, first of all, in making that environment habitable a lot of the time. And then the money that I would spend would always be on upskilling teachers, on making sure that they are the best trained people that we can put in front of our children, because they're the people that make the biggest difference. So get the environment right, and then get the upskilling of the teachers right. That's where I'd put the money. And I would also, it's quite contentious, I would also want to make the initial training period for teachers more than 9 months. And I know that has massive knock-on effects in terms of recruitment, but in an ideal world, to be a teacher would not be 9 months of training. And I know the ECF helps with that and kind of supplements that. But I think that creating a system that really invested at the start, before teachers had full responsibility of a class, would be another thing that I would do with my magic money pot. Fix the bill.
So many things. I mean, I think it's a really good shout, that, because I mean, I was thinking, a fairly obvious answer would be, talk about to teacher, there's obviously you've got the salaries, energy bills, all that kind of stuff. And it's really important to have teachers. But I think you're right, and investing in the buildings. It's one of the things I've noticed visiting so many schools as one of my big axes of variation, no question. Like the best schools, buildings are magnificent. And we have some incredible school buildings. In fact, I'm wearing my research head t-shirt here, very proud to have been involved in that at Parliament Hill on Saturday. And Parliament Hill is a local authority comprehensive school in London. And it has an incredible building. It's got a beautiful old Victorian building, and it's had a new wing built in the last few years. And it's absolutely extraordinary. And people were walking around. Some people were asking the school leaders, "Is this a state school?" Because they thought, why would a school that's not an independent school be as lovely as this? And that took a long time. I mean, for many, many years, one of their buildings was an absolute shocker, and so they lived for many years with this totally inadequate building. And so the money's gone in, and it has an impact, it really does. Elsewhere, boy, you're saying the Portugal scenario still in some places, it's depressing. Anyway, thank you for taking that one on. Good answer.
Thank you. I just have flashbacks to my own Portakabin experience, where you opened the store cupboard door, you go up the little steps and the store comes straight from you. Had a tree inside it, like an actual tree growing inside the store cupboard that had grown up through the floor. And then when you were teaching, it had jacks inside it to hold the ceiling up. And so the children, it was like watching Wimbledon. They were, when you walked around the room, they were going to go the jacks to watch it, thinking, this is nuts, having to teach.
It was interesting to note that Sam Freeman, who a lot of people know in the UK, was an advisor to the government that came in the UK in 2010 as a sort of government official, not a politician. And he now will say that one of the mistakes they made was to scrap the Building Schools for the Future programme.
I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah, and actually that was interesting to hear him reflect that, because obviously then they didn't have anything in place, and it set school building investment back a long way. So yeah, that was good to hear that he kind of recognised that wasn't the best plan. I'm not saying it was down to him, but it's that, we should have kept that going, basically, because it's hard enough to go around all the schools and give them the investment they need. Okay, let's do the next question.
Okay, were exams this year a success?
I think so. It's funny. I met a guy the other day on a training day, and I asked him how things had gone in the summer, and he said, "Oh, well, all the results have been down a bit, haven't they?" And that was the story he was telling himself. And actually, the answer is no, they weren't. That some schools did do better. And so, look, it depends what you're comparing to. I know schools who are really pleased that their results are better this year than their teacher assessed grades from last year. Which tells you that last year they were sort of not over-egging it, and they were sort of being true to the system. And the students, when they sat the exams, were able to demonstrate what they knew and what they could do, because they had something concrete to work towards, and so on. So I think having a proper exam system is the fairest way to assess a qualification compared with teacher assessed grades. And I think I'm really glad to have seen it to come back, and it's stabilizing again. So yeah, in that sense, yes. I mean, what are the other measures? I know lots of schools where I visit where, that was the hit message I was hearing. Relief to have the exams back. The kids took it in their stride. They were motivated to do well after all COVID. They wanted to do really well. They had the opportunity to test themselves, and they rose to it. So that's my bias, because those are the stories I'm being told. I'm not meeting anyone who is saying, "Oh, what a disgrace, we should go back to teacher assessed grades." In fact, I don't know anyone who says that to my knowledge that I've met.
Yeah, I think that some of the feedback I've been having is that there's so many having to be sent back for remarks, and it's really hard for school to to deal with that number of remarks. Don't mean in terms of that paperwork and actually physically sending it all back, but dealing with the messaging around that, talking to students, counselling students who have potentially missed opportunities at university or in further education, and then when the grade boundaries are adjusted and come back, and it's that whole thing around it. So I think I've spoken to quite a few secondary head teachers who are a little unhappy with the marking and the amount of remarking that's having to go on. It's slightly the experience, really.
And that's, in a way, that's a perennial issue. I mean, going back years now as a head teacher, 15 years, going to appeals panels, and you learn that the exam system has its issues for sure, which is why, as I'll go on about exams should be located in a wider frame and a baccalaureate type thing, so they have their place, but within a broader frame. And it's when they're the only game in town that there are issues. But I do think sometimes we need to invest in good examiners and all that kind of stuff. And they need time to do it well. But it's about, you always have to say what the alternative would be. And as soon as you say teacher assessment, I know, but let's make exam boards have the investment they need to make sure they can assess a national cohort of people fairly. Yeah. Anyway, look, that's a whole other, we could talk about it.
That's a whole other one to talk about. Right, hit me. Okay. What have we got?
Right. Okay. How early, how soon in a child's life is it ever appropriate for them to choose what they should learn about?
They do it all the time. It's only when they start school that we start to say what they have to learn. It's only because it's led by the child up until we decide that they have to interact with a curriculum. So they are at picking learning.
But if you didn't introduce that, if that just carried on, we'd all just be, like doing cave paintings, wouldn't we?
Exactly. But that's what I'm saying, is we there's this weird situation where up until sort of the age of 5, we trust children that they will follow their interests and they will develop, and we can kind of intervene as necessary. And then they hit 5 and we go, now you can't make any choices, we're going to make the choices for you. And then they get to sort of 14 and go, now you can have a little bit more of a say in it again. And at 16, you get another bit of a say in it. And at 18, you get to decide for yourself. So it's like at the beginning and the end of their academic experience or schooling experience, they have a huge degree of choice, and in the middle they have no choice. So it's an interesting question, because I guess it's about how much you want to control, or you think you should control what children learn. It's kind of I know best and they know nothing model, or is it that you kind of take the complete opposite and go, let's just follow the child's interest, and then you end up studying dinosaurs for 7 years and not doing anything else. So it's a weird situation. I don't think there's necessarily an age group or a particular age, because obviously children develop at different ages, stages, and at different speeds. But I do think that if you completely control everything that a child learns, they're not going to be critical thinkers anyway, because they're not going to be able to pursue their own interests. They're not going to be able to think, I'm really interested in that, or I'm really good at that. I want to do more of it. I want to develop my skills. So I think that a bit of freedom in the curriculum for them to explore their own interests and make those choices is sensible and useful. You can't say, stop thinking at 5, I'm going to decide for you. Now start thinking again at 14 and 16. Now you can have a bit of a choice. Unless you let them learn how to choose as well alongside a formal curriculum, they're never going to know what they like, what they're good at, how to make a decision, how to direct their own learning. It's just not going to happen. But I don't think it's now you're 7, you can do what you like, or now you're 10, you can do what you like. But I do think
I think you've sort of, you've struck struck gold there, because that's the point really of the question away, is like this debate gets a bit irritating, sort of like so many, it's like all or nothing. Of course, there's so many things that kids need to know about that they don't know about, so we have to shape that. And most of the curriculum, even 95% of it, probably needs to be driven by adults who kind of can drive that, and that's their knowledge about the world to share. But then it's that, like you say, teaching children to learn how to explore and giving them the opportunity to. I just feel sometimes that gets demonized out to oblivion. So, and it shouldn't be, but it's got to be managed so that you don't have children just deciding to learn something which is very low level or whatever. So that the space in the curriculum for children to find out how to find out stuff that they're interested in and pursue that needs to have its place, doesn't it? Alongside a kind of strongly planned curriculum. I think we'd agree on that.
Yeah, I think I call it in Simplicitus, I think I call it wriggle room. Just planning 20 curriculum with a little bit of wriggle room in there for you to be led as well by your class. Because I've taught, and you'll have done the same, you teach one class and they're just absolutely on fire with something. You think, I just want a bit more space to do more with them with this, or less of that, more of another thing. If you plan your curriculum as well to be absolutely completely stuffed to the gills, there's never any chance to respond to anybody, and all they are is kind of receiving information all the time, not actually involved in it. But neither do I.
There's a nice, neat.
Let's just do what we like.
You can do like where it's not just go off and find out, and there's a rude version of that. There's a sort of a structured task where you might say, if we wanted to sort of share the key ideas about, say, a mountain range or a forest or a city or even a country, here's a structure for the kind of knowledge that people might want to have about that thing. And so, but you can choose a specific case study. So I've seen some kids do some lovely work around cities, like mega cities, and you've got students bringing in Beijing, Jakarta, Mexico City, and so on, because they chose those cities and then they were reporting back on them with the structure. But they got to choose. Yeah. So even like that is so many ways you can have like little places to choose.
Yeah, I mean, we did one when when I was teaching how to write a biography. And they just chose the person that they wanted to write the biography about. So they were actually researching and finding out and collating all the information and curating it. And it was amazing how much we learned then from reading each other's biographies of the people, what we found out about that we wouldn't necessarily have found out about as a class if I'd have just said, right, we're all going to do a biography about Darwin. That's what we're going to do.
This is where, we're sort of middle roaders, and it's just, your rails of like reaction. So when someone says to me, the whole curriculum is so restrained and blah, blah, I just think, well, it isn't, is it? It's not entirely like that. And there are other people saying all this woolly stuff about kids choosing what to learn, what load of nonsense. You think, well, they don't really mean everything. If we have a sensible discussion, we normally come up with this sort of conclusion. Yeah. Anyway, that's all that good. That was my my challenge. Next question.
Right, my next question is, so you got your research ed t-shirt on there, and we've got loads of research now about how very nice. We've got loads of information about how students learn best, or how we can make student learning more effective. How good are we as a profession at understanding how teachers learn best? Have we got it right?
I think there's I think it's pretty well documented and researched, and like a lot of things, is it a proven thing? So we all know up to the nth level, probably not. But I think there's a general consensus around certain key factors. In fact, there was a fantastic Education Endowment Foundation report last year.
Oh, the one with the is it mechanisms?
Mechanisms, yeah, and that was really good because it really helps you get away from sort of, is it instructional coaching? Is it, visiting speakers, CPD? Is it all sort of teachers choosing their own thing? And they were saying, don't worry about that. Well, it can be lots of things as long as these mechanisms are present. And I thought that was really insightful. So, I mean, there are 4 groups of them. One of them is they have to build knowledge. So you have to teach adults like anyone, which is building on what we already know. So it sounds obvious, doesn't it? Build on what you already know and overlearn stuff, go over things repeatedly. So build knowledge is one. Second one was about motivation. So motivation in 2 forms. One is sort of encouragement type motivation, and the other one more sort of goal setting, like working towards stuff. The third one is you've got to actually teach the actual techniques teachers need to use. So you've got to model them and get people to practice them and have some social support around them. So the techniques themselves. And the fourth group was embedding. So sustaining those things so they become habits. So I thought, once you start breaking that down, that's based on surveying lots of research. And that sounds pretty sensible to me, so there are lots of different forms of that. There are still lots of schools though where it's kind of the one-off inset day and not much else happens, but I think we're getting better at the implementation of those.
Yeah.
That's
the report, isn't it? The one with the toothpaste. It's got the thing about the fluoride in the toothpaste at the beginning, that the mechanism is the fluoride, and as long as it... I remember reading that and thinking, oh, that's interesting.
I think there's lots of research around. There's some brilliant stuff. I remember Harry Fletcher Wood reporting there's things that don't work and things which make a difference. And one of the things I'm endlessly fascinated by is team culture. And I find lots of leaders find this resonates with them and teachers, that the team culture you're in is really what mediates the whole process. If you're in a team where people are pretty up for it, enthusiastic, supportive, up for changing things and trying things and embedding things and talking things through, then that's the culture you're in, and that will help you sustain your practice. But if you're in a room full of people who are just sort of constantly eye-rolling and thinking this doesn't apply to us and we're a bit different and kind of negative about the whole idea of professional development, that's the culture you're in. And it's hard for those teachers to thrive and push themselves on if the people around them aren't. And I think that's really interesting. So attending to team culture I find that endlessly interesting.
Have you heard the analogy about marigolds and nut trees?
No, but are you about to tell me?
I am. Right, so if you plant a marigold next to anything, like if you go into an allotment and you see all the vegetables growing, you see gardeners plant marigolds, because marigolds make other things grow better. The opposite of a marigold is a nut tree. If you plant a nut tree near any other plant, it dies. And it's a bit like, if you've got any nut trees on your team, it's really hard to grow people. But if you've got a team full of marigolds, then everybody gets to thrive. And every staff room has got marigolds in it. And every staff room has got a nut tree in it. Well, somewhere.
That is so interesting. One of the things I've been talking about at home recently is the kind of the phenomenon of the exceptionalism in teaching. And it'd be false to characterize it as any particular subject or type of teacher. And there are sort of characters and individuals who just their answer to everything is, well, it's not quite like that for us. Or in our subject, it's a bit different. You don't really understand our needs. And that's good for you, but we don't really need that for us. Sort of everything is, and everyone, the funny thing is that everyone can feel like that about their work. Yeah. It's different. And yet, actually, teachers just have so much in common, and they don't like to admit it sometimes. Like, we all ask questions, we all check for understanding, we all have to overlearn stuff. The Rosenshine's principles kind of stuff, modelling, scaffolding, they're pretty universal, and they just can't get away from it. However, we all like to
think we're unique, though, Tom. We all like to. We like to be special. Anyway, I must credit it's Jennifer Gonzalez from Cult of Pedagogy that talks about marigolds and nut trees. That's not mine. That's Jennifer. So mustn't anyone think that that's mine.
It's like that bit in Life of Brian where they say, we're all individuals and we've all got minds of our own. And someone says, I'm not. It's just very funny.
But everybody is saying that we have to be like stormtroopers either, like coming in exactly the same. Nobody's saying that either. Right.
So I think this, like, to conclude, we kind of do know, but then it's about implementation, and schools are at all different places. Yesterday, one of my favorite types of day, it was all via Zoom, which I guess is not totally perfect, but it meant I could I had 5 different sessions, each about 45 minutes, and each one had 3 schools on the call, all from my local area, all primary, and they're all talking through their PD program, and 15 different sets of leaders talking about what they're doing, how it's working. Amazing. And also enthusiastic, up for it, all subtly different in the way that they're implementing. Some are more full-on coaching, some are really up for the idea of paired coaching, some are doing it more like whole school together, and then learning walks and then whole school together. It's so interesting, the variation and the kind of creativity in that. So that was exciting. Okay, this is a bit of a hard one, but and I don't know if you sound critical, because it's a fact of our experience. But why does any child leave primary school and still not be able to read fluently?
Oh, there's myriad reasons why that is. I think, again, to bring it back to curriculum, I think there's too much in there. I don't think sufficient space is allowed or given to developing reading in a lot of cases. I think that we're so busy trying to stuff everything into the curriculum that potentially the reading isn't given the front. I mean, you know how I feel about this, the kind of the front and centre part that it should be from primary. And that's partly through fear, because we're worried a lot of the time that we'll be judged on 12 things rather than actually saying, like, this is the most important thing. This is the most important thing we need to get right. And until the focus changes on how primary schools are judged and inspected, I don't think that's part, not all of it, but part of the reason why reading will stall. I also think the work that people like Chris Such is doing in terms of really educating primary teachers about exactly how to teach reading, because there's been a lot of mismessaging over the last 20 odd years. Things have fallen in and out of fashion. There's been no consistent single approach to this is actually how we teach reading from 4 to 11. There's been phonics, obviously, but there hasn't been that investment in, right, this as a profession, as a phase, as a part of the sector, this is how we teach the most important part. So schools have been kind of feeling their way through how to do that with no joined up thinking. I mean, the National Literacy Strategy donkeys years ago tried to do that. Elements of it, okay, other elements of it, horrendous. But there isn't any national joined up coherent approach to the training of the teachers who are teaching it, to the resourcing of it. There's so many changes around the messaging about what we should be doing that it's really hard, unless you're somebody who is massively passionate about it and really, really understands it, to get it right across the whole school is really hard.
Let me ask you a question, like, because there's so many. So, like, let me take a child and think about an individual kid who, you know, they go to school and there's a phonics program. It might be they get their baseline assessment, all that, and they're doing phonics lessons, and all of that is happening. So what happens sort of from there? So is it that in the ideal scenario, every single child could learn to read fluently by the time they're 11? It's just that it's not done, or because they fall through gaps, or because other things get in the way for them, or are there fundamental? Should it be possible for a child to do it?
There will always be some children who won't be able to read by 11, by the very nature of their personal sort of circumstances, barriers, whatever that is. But the vast majority of children should be able to read by the time they leave primary. But, as I said, the overstuffed curriculum, the lack of the coherent approach across the profession to how best to teach it, the lack of investment in resourcing, the associated training to go with that. And that's not excuse making. That's just, this is the result of what's happened. And I think that because reading is often so deeply aligned with just phonics, that kind of simple view of reading, of the broader picture, is kind of, it's not emphasised enough. The fact that children need to be read challenging texts, have that read to them every day, be immersed in rich vocabulary, have opportunities to speak, to talk, to listen, to discuss, because the language needs to develop alongside the decoding to be able to actually comprehend what people are saying and what's being read. And you do need broad general knowledge to be a really good reader, because you need to understand what you're actually reading. So there are so many dimensions to reading, which is why it needs a really coherent approach, and why it's not as simple as just doing phonics across primary. It's so broad, it's so multifaceted, and each individual school is kind of, apart from the phonics programs, being left to figure that out for themselves.
Well, that's what I was asking. Do you think that this is something which the DFE should get to grips with, or do you think that, no, for God's sake, don't let them come near it, and the profession should, through sort of...
This is why I'm laughing. I said, oh my goodness. When I say somebody needs to have a coherent approach, I don't necessarily department. But I do think that the investment in a sector-wide approach, an informed sector-wide approach to the development of language is, and I don't necessarily think it's just reading, because reading doesn't sit on its own. It's surrounded by oracy, it's surrounded by vocabulary development. And it also depends so much on on not just the mechanics of reading that we teach in school, but also the wider experiences of the children, the opportunities they get outside of school to hear and to use language. It's so important to get the whole of language development right, because that impacts on the ability of children to read. It's not a mechanical process. It's total. I don't want to
the kind of Chris Such kind of philosophy, which sounds to be like, he's someone, he's not like world famous or anything, but he's someone who has made an impact with his ideas for sure. Mm-hmm. Is there a consensus in the sector around the ideas he's sharing that would be the way to go?
I'm yet to find somebody who doesn't love his book. I'll put it like that. I am yet to find anybody who says that man is talking nonsense, because he's not. And what he's done is unpicked and demystified and put together all of the research that works. And because he's, an experienced primary teacher, it works. He gets it, and he writes from a standpoint of this is actually what you need to do. But because there are so many elements to the teaching of reading, it's not just mechanics, it's all of this broader stuff. It's really difficult to get your head around alongside 12 other subjects. And that's why I'm saying, if you move the noise of the wider curriculum and let primary focus on the really important thing, which is getting fluent readers, then I think we would get more fluent readers through the system. And people will go, oh, well, before there was an emphasis on wider curriculum, you still haven't got it right. It's like, yeah, because everyone was still tinkering with it and there was a coherent process to that.
Okay, well, that's the agenda set for the new Secretary of State. Today it happens to be somebody new.
Hopefully, if he wants to give me and Chris...
It's Kit Malthouse. Hopefully he's still in power next time when this goes out. We'll find out. Okay, well, I think we've got time for one more question. So I think it's your time to ask me again, isn't it?
Right, okay. Here's one. What gifts does primary give secondary and secondary give primary?
Love both ways. But it's funny, isn't it? Because it's funny because we represent these sort of sectors in our professional world, and I think, well, there's so many things. I think it's the sort of the whole holistic view of a child versus the specialism that you tend towards the secondary, and it's those two things, and the communication between those two ideas is really interesting, and I think you've got to learn from both. So, you just have to look at something like writing and the richness that you have in the primary classroom, where writing can flow from day to day with the same teacher following the same line of thought over several days, weaving the other ideas in and out and crafting pieces of writing over time. And then you go into secondary where it's book. So how can we create more kind of focus there? But then going down to primary, that kind of really knowing, it's difficult, but having that sort of knowledge of how ideas develop in a particular curriculum in the depth that secondary teachers have got. Now, in a way, it's really useful that we have this sort of transition, and then you can switch gear because each one of them is highly specialised, as we've discussed many times. And maybe it's not about making primary more like secondary or secondary more like primary. I actually think, I've always felt this, that the transition is sensible, it's natural, and we've switched gear from one mode of learning to another because of the general transition. And various attempts to sort of make a kind of primary type year 7 and a secondary type year 6, I don't think they really work that well. So I just think we should respect each other's sort of contribution to the whole journey for what it does. I don't think you can necessarily import it successfully. I don't think you should try to.
Interesting. I've been working with a few all through schools, and it's really interesting how they manage that gradual shift or that change. And it's interesting how much crossover there is between 6 and 7, as in how much the year 7 teachers working in a year 6 classroom and just kind of go, oh, wow, this is really, really different. This feels really different. And then it's amazing how much professional development the primary teachers get from seeing the year 7 teachers teach their subject specialism with their own children. I think there's huge mileage in year 7 looking at some of the year 6 pedagogy, and then the year 6 is looking at how you teach a subject really rigorously as a specialist subject. I think there's an unexplored avenue there for developing both.
It's interesting how, like, a secondary teacher will teach, year 7, 8, and 9, and they'll have a sense of the flow of ideas.
Yeah.
Teach them at different levels. And a primary teacher will teach across different subjects. So you've got that vertical and horizontal kind of knowledge base. But how much you can learn from that. I think there's a lot to learn about the sequence of concepts in maths, and also about the need to sort of keep things concrete and stuff well into secondary. And in writing, I think the crafting of writing over time, secondary teachers would do well to know what the standards are. So sometimes, I've had it pointed out to me in a previous role, do you know what the standards for the end of Key Stage 1 are? Joined on the lines, full stop, capital letter. And then, well, so why aren't some of your year 8 teachers insisting on that in geography? Because they don't know what the standards are. So knowing what the standards are would help, so you can sort of pitch them.
Yeah, and I think that brings in that idea of moderation, because it's really hard sometimes to moderate a subject, especially in upper Key Stage 2. And it'd be really useful to do we used to do our moderation in year 6 with our high school. So they would actually have their kind of head of department in there with all the local year 6 teachers looking at, what writing looks like. And the first few times both sides of the table were a bit like, oh.
Yeah, no. But that's why I'm a big fan of like say collaborative book scrutinies and stuff. Just let's all share what we look at, what we do, and learn from each other. The need for some leaders to take books away and scrutinise is a nightmare. Just get everyone looking at each other's stuff, and you learn vertically across the school. Okay, I think we're going to come to a close in it, and I've got one more question. I think I'll add one more, which is okay, because then if I'm allowed, we'll squeeze this one in. Are you ready for this?
Yeah.
If every minute of time that teachers and TAs spent on display was diverted to helping create better teaching resources to scaffold learning and so on, do you think the children would learn more or less?
I think it depends on their age. No, I do. I genuinely do. Because if you're in a classroom that needs lots of signposting where children aren't necessarily used to the routines of the room, you need to have things displayed that children can see, and they help them navigate and find things and know how things work. That needs to be done, and that's an element of display. It's kind of communicative display, I guess, but it's still display. And also, little children love seeing their work on show. They're proud of it. And I think as well, the fact that the primary classroom is your home for the entire day, to have it as kind of a Spartan, non-displayed environment, a bit like living in an IKEA wardrobe, that's your home. That's your kind of class family home. So you do want it to look attractive and as well as be functional. And you want it to be somewhere that children like to be in, because they've got to be in it for 6.5 hours a day. I'm not a fan of those people who do these immersive thematic classrooms that take 14 hours to build the, a miniature version of Hogwarts in the corner of the room. I'm not a big fan of that. But I think that areas in the classroom to celebrate children's great work, areas in the classroom to signpost what's going on, areas in the classroom that are comfortable to sit and to read and to enjoy and to explore. I think that's an important part of the primary experience. I think when you get to secondary, if you're spending 14 hours draping chiffon off your note rather than actually planning your lessons, then maybe that's not the best use of your idea. But I do think it's going back to, why would you do the display? What's the function of the display? What do you want to achieve as a result of doing this display? Not just, I'm a frustrated interior designer, I want to make this space look a bit Lawrence Llewellyn Bowen. It's actually why would I put this here, or why would I not put this here? I think that's that critical professional thinking that needs to sit around it. If you don't do any display, you sit in a white box all day with your very young children, not great, but neither.
So it's trade-offs, isn't it? It's trade-offs. And,
yeah,
and
exactly.
I think some people, it gets overdone. I mean, I think sometimes people feel like a bit overburdened by it. But yeah, I mean, you walk into a classroom, you want to feel like it's a place to be. But if you're kidding yourself that the specific sort of wording on that graphic over there in the corner is going to help children learn more, they probably can't even see it. So it's big scale stuff and things like number lines. I mean, as a maths teacher, if I can't point to a number line at any instant, I sort of, it's really frustrating. You need it there. It's like, it should be there. It's constantly referring to it.
Display for function, and there's display for celebration, and there's display for exploration. There is not necessarily just display to go, oh, aren't I a marvellously talented teacher with my
has written a book on here. It's one in a period where everything was for learning, and she's written a book called Display for Learning. It's on my shelf here, so I'm just sort of exploring the area. So wow, okay, bam, that was great, amazing. So many things to talk about. I found that really, really invigorating. So I hope our listeners.
Your invigorating is my stressful.
Oh, well, that's good. Those are some toughies there. Anyway, look, thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for listening to Mind the Gap, making education work across the globe with me, Tom Sherrington, and Emma.
Thank you. It's been a lovely session, lovely recording. Thanks, Tom.
Well, it looks like you've been right there. So listen out for, if you haven't picked up on recent episodes, talking to Diana Asagi was absolutely fantastic. And also Sam Strickland and his behaviour recent episodes. I hope you enjoyed this one, and we'll see you very soon on Mind the Gap. Thank you very much.